I want to thank Mark for the reading, and think about what he said at the beginning of his reading is talking about little children. And Jesus used this to illustrate the fact that little children are teachable. They're really not concerned with the things of the world. When you consider children, they don't care about money. They don't care about people, that whether they're rich or whether they're poor or whether anything about this. They don't never look at things like that. They don't think of things like this. You know, little kids growing up, most of the time they may see the difference in the color of people, but they don't make no prejudice remarks to them. If you turn little kids loose in this room here, they don't really see the color. They just play and enjoy each other. It's as we get older that all these other emotions and these other thoughts comes into our mind that we begin to see things different. Little children, they don't care if one comes from a wealthy family or a poor family. They don't care whether one has got on the fancy clothes or just the rag clothes. They don't look at that. They just see each other and enjoy each other as they play together. And that's sort of what I want us to think about. I'm just going to be using from Proverbs and Ecclesiastes for this lesson. It's not hopefully one of these short, long, lengthy lessons, but I just want us to think about these things. And I was really wanting my grandson to be here this evening. They're on their way, but I don't know if they're going to make it or not. But not to be envious of evil men. And what I mean by evil men, I'm thinking on the line of what Proverbs teaches us in Proverbs chapter 24, verses 1 and 2. Do not be envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their hearts devises violence, and their lips speak of trouble or talk of troublemaking. What we as people, and when we think about this lesson, I want you to think about really, and what we're going to be talking about is the Hollywood elite, people like that. People who are rich and famous. And sometimes we allow the rich and famous to set standards for us. And that's a dangerous thing. If back in the 80s and things, that you see kids, they begin to mock the rock stars. They begin to let their hair grow long, and then they begin to cut their pants to where they just barely would be hanging on them. And if you bought a decent pair of jeans, first thing they do is take a razor blade and cut them all to pieces. I've even known of guys who put them on a line and took shotguns and shot them to tear them up. And you know, in my growing up, I was always ashamed of pants that I had to have a patch on or a rip in. But you know, these and they're still pretty famous right now. You know, you can put your old jeans on the internet and sell them for a great big price. You still buy them like that. People still do them like that. And what we did is allow them to sort of set our dress codes and let them sort of set the standard on how we would act and how we would do. They have a lot of influence through young people. Now, probably if you're like me and you're my age and things like that may not interest you. But if you're younger people, and I see a few here that sometimes that may influence. That may have a great influence on. So what I want us to think about is thinking about the rich and famous and take the lesson from a man who, in my way of looking, was more richer and more famous than any of them, and let him sort of set the grounds of these ideals. Again, in Proverbs, and these are Solomon's writings, hail and destruction are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. This is Solomon talking, a very wise man, a very understanding man. He was just, he is just full of wise sayings and a very intelligent man. And no doubt this intelligence comes by God. But in chapter 2, and what we want to look at is from verses about, verse 1 down through about 11 here, that he talks about. But one more verse from Isaiah. He says in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, "Woe unto those who call good evil or evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who puts bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." Here's a person that wants to change the description of everything. Everything that is bad becomes good. Everything that is sweet becomes, or bitter becomes sweet. So they take a whole different picture of it, or a different view of it, than really what God's Word takes. And so Solomon is going to give us an idea of what happens to a person who really gets to do anything and everything that they want to do. And they can be a wealth, they can be famous, they can be all this wealth of it. And so he starts out in verse 1, and as we read these, we'll think about it. "I said in my heart, come now, and I will test you with myrrh and with myrrh. Therefore, enjoy pleasure. But surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of myrrh, what do it accomplish?" That's the first two verses that he talks about. He said is in his heart, come down, I'm going to test you with myrrh, and therefore the joys, to enjoy the pleasures. Now, what he is going to have opportunity to do is really, it's a test to see that can man really ever be satisfied? Can anything fill a man? Can that make a man full or complete? Well, I want to back up to what he said in Proverbs 27 and verse 20. Hell and destruction are never full. You get that? Hell and destruction is never full. It's like trying to fill up a bucket with the bottom of it out. And you know how that's going to go over. You could spend the rest of your life pouring water into that bucket, and it would never be full. Well, that's what he says hell and destruction are like. But then he says, so the eyes of man can never be satisfied. You ever notice? What is it about a man's eyes? What about his desires? How many times have you went out and bought something that you think that is going to satisfy you? And you get it. And after you get it, it don't satisfy you. You begin to want something else. Sometimes before the new wears off of it, you begin to want something else. He's saying, look, the eyes of man, no matter what is going on in your life, there will always be a want. Now, notice I said a want, not a need. But it's a want. You know, Jesus in his very teaching said that he would take care of our needs. He'd give us what we need. If we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, those things we need, Jesus will add them to us. But here's Solomon. He gets the pleasure of seeking all these things. He said it's madness, the myrrh. What does it accomplish? I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the Son of Man to do under heaven all the days of his life. In other words, what he is putting to test here is to see what would be the benefit to everybody on this earth. how that it would benefit the Son of Man under heaven all the days of their life. What would it take to satisfy them? What would it take to make them complete? Now he's talking about complete of your own lust and of the things that you have a desire to do. So it is just like us. We see the people maybe of Hollywood, especially the younger people, and that's why I wish this building was full of young people right now, is that we see all the things that's going on in the elite people of the world, whether it's basketball, football, or whatever it may be. And sometimes we can have a longing to be like them, to do the things that they do. You know, to signing your name on a piece of paper to agree to play for a team, and they lay you out $1 million. You see, a young person could aspire to that, to want to do that. But then it throws people right among. Now, I'm not saying that every player is like this, but the majority of them are. And I'm just going to name names. Just like LeBron James is my grandson's favorite player. He put out on YouTube talking about our president. And you couldn't listen to it because they had to bleep it out because of the talk that he was handling. You see, he's one of the elite people that there's not a person probably in the United States that don't know LeBron James and knows what he does. And he is good at it. I'm talking about basketball. And you got children who grow up, just like the commercial used to say about Michael Jordan, that they wanted to be like Mike. And you got children who see these people and they hold them very high because of their abilities and their wealth. Because, you know, it's like one old boy said one time, his boy was talking to him. He said, I'd like to have me a Corvette, and he named off a bunch of stuff. He said, just squeeze you finish your school and get you a job, you can buy any car you want. But he said, right now you're driving that one. And it was a Chevy Nova. So he's telling him, you know, look, you don't start off from the bottom, you build your way up. So this is what Solomon is saying, you know, the vanity of the pleasures of these riches in this world is not going to bring you happiness. He goes on, I made my works great. I built myself houses. I planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards. And I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made myself watering pools from which to water the growing trees of the grove. I acquired male and female servants, and I had servants born in my house. Yes, I had great possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. Now again, Solomon is pointing out his wealth. This is, you might say that if we didn't know the whole purpose behind Solomon, we could say, boy, he's a very arrogant man here. But he's telling you, I had all of it. I had more than anybody before me in Jerusalem. Now you take, there's pretty wealthy people. You know, Abraham wasn't no bum. Abraham was a very wealthy man. Very wealthy man. Other people were wealthy. David was a wealthy king. So you had a lot of wealthy people at this time, but Solomon said, look, I acquired even beyond what they had. Notice what he's got here. He said, I made myself vineyards. This is some of the things that I thought that would make me happy. You know, one of the things that people look to make them happy is the material things of this world. That's what they look at. If I had a new house, I could be more happier. If I had a new vehicle, I'd be happier. If I had this, I would be happier. If I had that, it would make me happy. If I had this, it'd make me happy. We're looking at the wrong things, and this is what Solomon is saying to us. He's saying, look, these things here is not what's going to make you happy. These things does not make you happy, but yet he's showing us that he had all these things. And what did they do for him? Well, he goes on and he'll tell us before this lesson is over what these did for him as far as what satisfied, what completed his life. You know, that's one of the problems that we have. As I said, we look at material things to make our lives completed. We just think that if I had this, that'd be it. If I had this, that'd just be it. I'd be so satisfied. He said, I had the fruit trees. I had the gardens. I had the groves of trees. I made a place to where I could cultivate that with water so that anytime maybe we had a drought, I could take care of these trees. He said, I had servants, and I had servants of both male and female, and I had servants born in my house. I mean, he was just a person who is describing just how wealthy he was. Again, he goes on. I also gathered of myself silver and gold, and of special treasures of kings, of the providence. Ooh, think about that. I gathered silver and gold, and the special treasures of kings of all the providence. Now here, buddy, is a feller, is that old expression was, son, he was rolling in the dough, wasn't he? He was bringing in the bacon. I required male and female singers, and I delighted of the sons of men and musicians, instruments of all kinds. So I become great and exceedingly more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Again, he points out that look, I'm greater. I've done all these things. I've had the silver, I've had the gold, I've had the singers, I've had instruments, I've had everything that you can mention. And he said, even before me in Jerusalem. I mean, look at his life, and you think about that kind of life. You know, we may have wealthy people in this world, but I doubt even today that if anybody could come up close to Solomon here. You know, money today is not like having the gold and silver that he had. And then especially where he says these special treasures, I just wonder what they could be, the special treasures. I would think like maybe rubies and diamonds and emeralds and very costly array of the finest that man could have at that time. Solomon had that. Also, my wisdom remained with me. In other words, the wisdom that God gave him, it still remained with him. Whatsoever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. Now, to just think about this just for a minute. What if you was in a position in your life that anything your eyes saw, that you was in position to just say, I want it, what's the cost of it? They tell you, you just pay it and you go on. You don't go, let me see if I got enough money here. You just say, I want it, put it in the truck or whatever it may be. I want it, no cost, no problem. Well, that's sort of the way Solomon was. Anything that his eyes desired, he said, I didn't keep it from me. I want that over there, go get it. I want that over there, buy it, purchase it. I want that over here, purchase it, buy it. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. Anything that Solomon did. And you know, me and you have pleasures in life. I'm not saying that Solomon is giving us this and God is showing us this through Solomon to say that you can't have pleasures in life. But it is giving us an example here that if we're counting on the things and the pleasures that life brings us to make us whole and to complete us, I think we're counting on something that is broke, that will not work. I think even in Hebrews, I think that Moses understood this in his life. And here's what he says. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. What do you think that did for him? Here he goes in and says, I'm not your son. I'm not your son. I'm a Hebrew. Choosing rather to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin. You see, there is pleasure. And Solomon experienced all this in his life. He says, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. This was my reward. Then he says this, and summing it up. Then I looked on all the work that my hands had done, and all the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity, and gasping for the wind, or grabbing at the wind rather. There was no profit under the sun. How many people today are like Solomon, who are just looking for the pleasures that they can grab in this world, to enjoy the things of this world, and yet leaving God out of it? The thing about Solomon here was, in what Solomon was doing, he was not leaving God. That's why his wisdom remained. Now Solomon does get older and he does mess up. He messes up. So Solomon is telling us, sure, these things is what it is. Look at it. Proverbs 14:13 says this, even in laughter the heart may sorrow, and the end of myrrh may be grief. You remember Solomon said he had this. The laughter. He is looking for the things that give him joy. The myrrh is precious ointment. And he said even in the end that these may just be grief to you. And we could go one step farther here and look at Solomon's life. Because he began to marry strange women. And we can see how all that he looked for and stuff ends up bringing him some misery in life. Because these began to even pull him away from God. So as we think about this, those who live in pleasure are exposed. I mean, that's just the facts of it. They can't continue to do that and not escape. Whatever my eyes desire, I did not keep from them. I could stand here and tell you about a feller and call his name, but you could always tell that his heart was always set on things of the world. It was all about the material things of the world. And you could tell by his attitude he was more excited about things of the world than he was for the things of God. And this person, after he gets up in age, a person who is a little bit older than I myself, his life went the ways of the world. It was just always looking for something in the world, whether it was a new car, new motorcycle, or whatever, a new house or whatever. It was something like that all the time, that he could never get his feet planted to where, that he would get in life and say, look, this is where I'm at, this is what I need, and let it go with that. He was not like Paul. He was not content in whatever stage of life that he was found in. He was always looking for something better and bigger. And that's sad, because it was what his eyes desired to keep him happy. His desires was not to please God and to keep God happy with his life. Solomon gives us this illustration here, that everything that he did here did not bring him peace. It did not make his life fuller. We go back to what he said in Proverbs, that hell and destruction is never full. And a man's eyes is never satisfied. You never fill your eyes to the point that you're satisfied. And when we're like that, we end up destroying our own lives. You know, Jesus teaching those in Matthew, he said, if you was to gain this world and lose your soul, what would you give in exchange for it? Sometimes this attitude of looking to fill our hearts or to satisfy our life by material things, we become in competition with each other. We may not realize it, but we do sometimes. Somebody may get something new, and we begrudge that. We have hard feelings toward it. Well, why did they get that? Why does this always good things have to happen to them? Why can't it be me? You see, we become competition with people. Why? Because we're looking for the things of the world to fill our heart, to fill the empty spot in our heart, when in fact it should be the Word of God. As the Philippian writer says, let these words dwell in you. Talking about the gospel. Now, as we think about Solomon, and as he continues writing this book, I want you to think about what he teaches us in chapter 12 now. As he ends up in this book giving us all this, I'm telling you, magnificent teaching. He talks about all that he gets to do, all that his heart could do. Now he's going to bring us to realize what we need to know. Solomon, without a doubt, is among the elite and among the richest of anybody that we could name. He had more than anybody up to his time in Jerusalem ever had. He could not measure beyond that, because that was future. But in the past, he said, I've had more than they all. So when he comes to chapter 12, he starts this with us. Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth, before the deceitful or the difficult days come. He's saying, look, remember God in your youth, when God can get some benefit out of you. When you can work and give some labor to the kingdom of God. That's what he's talking about. If you was a farmer and you had fields to be plowed, and you went out here to the stock sale, and there was a fine looking mule standing there, and you went over there and you said, how much is this mule? And this guy says, well, this mule is 35 years old. You're not going to buy that mule, because you understand that mule's life is right on the verge of being over. And you're just not going to get no benefit out of it. But you see a man standing there and he says, this mule's 4 years old. It's been broke. It's broke to the plow. It's broke to the sled. It's broke to a buggy. It's an all-around good mule. It's got like that. And you look at that and it's 4 years old, and you can figure, okay, I can get at least 14 good years out of that mule. Which mule would you buy? I believe you'd buy the 4-year-old. Why? Because you're going to be able to get some work out of it. Now, this is not to say that God don't save older people. But it is saying to us that we need to remember our Creator in the days of our youth. And we need to train our children, especially when it comes to Christ. In Ephesians chapter 6, there it teaches us to train our children up in the Lord, so that they won't forget the Lord, that they will remember the Lord. But a lot of times we fail in that. He says, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. You know, when you get my age and some of the other ages in here, you know, you get out of bed a lot slower. You set your feet on the floor a lot slower. And when you raise from that bed to stand up, you stand up a lot slower. And then you make your way into the kitchen and you think, oh, my back feels like somebody has beaten me. When you're young and you snap awake, most of the time you hit the floor running. And we hit the floor groaning. That's the difference in a lot of cases. He says, while the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened. You think about that. And the clouds do not return after the rain. You think about the sun darkening and the moon and stuff and the stars, that's your eyes, see. Then he says, in the day when the keeper of the house trembles and the strong man bows down when the grinders cease because they are few. Well, I know what the grinders are and I know what the bowing down is. As age overtakes us, instead of standing up straight and tall like a young man, we start giving under the load. Our old teeth wear out. He says, and these that look through the glass grow dim. There's the eyesight. But running out of time, I want to jump down to verse 6. Remember your Creator before the silver string is loosened and the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain. That's when life is over. You go out to get the water, and this is sort of the pitcher here. The golden bowl that you take out there of that pitcher, you slip and you drop it and it's broke all to pieces. Well, that's life. That's how fragile life is. That's just how fragile your life and my life is. Then the dust shall return to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Here's vanity of vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity. It's all vanity. Now, he goes in over here, verses 9 and stuff, and he talks down through, and I'm going to skip for time's sake on over. And here's what he says. Look at verse, I believe, 12 here, if I can find verse 12. This Bible's not got them on the outside edge, so I have to sort of look for them here for a second. Well, let's just go on and just read these. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to finish applicable words, teachable words. And that was written was upright. The words of truth, the words of the wise are like gold, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails, given by one shepherd, and farther by some. Be admonished by these of, making many books, there is no end, and such study is wearisome to the mind. Let us hear the conclusion of God. This is the whole point of what we're talking about tonight. Fear God, keep His commandments, for this is man's whole duty. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether it be good or evil. Here's what Solomon is saying to us all. I did it all. As Frank Sinatra says, he did it his way. God allowed him to do that for the purpose of showing us if we want a full and complete life, we cannot leave God out of it. The things of this world is not going to make us happy. The things that we possess is not going to make us happy. It's not going to make us complete. If we're going to be complete, We have to be complete in Christ. And that's what the New Testament teaches us, that we are complete in Him. Outside of Him, we're miserable. It's like the lesson this morning. Solomon is saying, it don't matter about riches. It don't matter about famous. It don't matter what it is. The whole duty that we have is to fear God and keep His commandments. If I want a full life, and a life that is meaningful, and a life that is prosperous in this world and the world to come, is to fear my God and keep His commandments. If we're not doing that, our life is really nothing. So you think about this chapter 2, verses through 11, and chapter 12, and see what Solomon is trying to get us to understand. It's not about what you possess. It's not about where you've been, but it's where you're going. It's not about riches. We can see from the rich man that riches can destroy us. The love of money is the root of all evil. Sometimes we have a desire to be rich, and yet we're willing to give up our soul in order to be so. We don't need to do that. We need to just fear God and keep His commandments. If you're here and you're not a child of God, we want you to do that. Fear God and keep His commandments. If you're here as a child of God that is erred, what we want you to do is to fear God and keep His commandments and make that right. As together we stand and sing.